Every morning, the city bus rolled out onto the streets at exactly 7:15 a.m., its tires humming against the asphalt as it followed the same route day after day. Harold, the driver, had been steering this particular bus for over 20 years. He knew every bump in the road, every sharp turn, and every stop like the back of his hand. But what he loved most about his job wasn't just driving, it was the people. Over the decades, Harold had come to recognize many of his passengers by sight, if not by name. There were the retirees who chatted loudly about their grandchildren, the young professionals glued to their phones or laptops, and the students dragging themselves to school with sleepy expressions. Among these familiar faces, one passenger stood out more than the others, a young black girl who always sat in the same seat near the back of the bus. She looked no older than 12 or 13, her neatly pressed uniform hinting at a life filled with rules and expectations. Yet there was something haunting about her presence. Every single day, without fail, she boarded the bus with tears streaming down her cheeks. Sometimes they were silent tears, barely noticeable unless you paid close attention. Other times, her sobs were audible, muffled only slightly by the noise of the engine and the chatter of other passengers. At first, Harold thought little of it. Kids her age often went through tough times. Maybe she'd had an argument with a friend, failed a test, or gotten into trouble at home. These things happened, and Harold figured she'd bounce back eventually. After all, kids are resilient, aren't they? So he kept his focus on the road, glancing occasionally in the rearview mirror but never saying a word. It wasn't his place to interfere, he told himself. Still, something about her tugged at him, gnawing at the edges of his mind long after she stepped off the bus each morning. Days turned into weeks, and the girl remained a constant fixture on Harold's route. Her routine never changed. She'd climb aboard at the same stop, clutching her backpack tightly to her chest as though it were some kind of lifeline. Then she'd shuffle to her usual spot near the back, slump into the seat, and stare blankly out the window. On some mornings, she tried to hide her tears, wiping them away quickly with the sleeve of her blazer. But no matter how hard she tried, the sadness radiating from her was impossible to miss. Harold began to notice small details about her that made her stand out even more. For instance, she never spoke to anyone, not a single word. While other students laughed and joked with their friends, she remained utterly silent, almost invisible. Even when someone accidentally bumped into her while boarding the bus, she didn't react. She simply pulled her legs closer to her body, shrinking further into herself as if trying to disappear entirely. It was as though she carried an invisible weight on her shoulders, heavy enough to crush her spirit but light enough for her to carry alone. One morning, curiosity got the better of Harold. As he waited for passengers to board at a busy intersection, he glanced in the mirror again, catching sight of the girl staring absently at the floor. Her eyes were red and swollen, evidence of yet another sleepless night spent crying. This time, however, something seemed different. She wasn't just sad. She looked scared. The realization sent a chill down Harold's spine. What could possibly make a child so afraid? That evening, as Harold parked the bus in the depot and headed home, he couldn't shake the image of the girl from his mind. He replayed the scene over and over again, wondering what might be causing her so much pain. Was it bullying? Family? Problems, or something else entirely? Frustrated by his inability to help, he decided to talk to his wife Margaret about it. Margaret had always been his sounding board, offering wise advice whenever he needed it most. "Margaret," he said as they sat down to dinner, "there's this girl I see on the bus every morning. She's young, probably around 12 or 13, and she cries every single day. I don't know what to do." Margaret listened intently, setting aside her fork to give him her full attention. "Have you asked her what's wrong?" she asked gently. Harold shook his head. "No, I haven't. I don't want to pry. Besides, it's not really my business, is it?" Margaret tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe not," she admitted, "but sometimes people need someone to care enough to ask. You've seen her every day for weeks now. If you're worried about her, maybe it's worth checking in, just to make sure she's okay." Her words lingered in Harold's mind long after their conversation ended. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, He didn't want to overstep boundaries or embarrass the girl by drawing attention to her struggles. On the other hand, what if she truly needed help? What if no one else had noticed, or worse, what if they had noticed but chose to ignore it? The thought weighed heavily on him, keeping him awake late into the night. By the time dawn broke, Harold had made up his mind. He wouldn't confront the girl directly, not yet anyway. Instead, he resolved to pay closer attention to her behavior during the next few days. Perhaps there was a clue he'd missed, something subtle that might explain why she seemed so broken. Determined to find answers, Harold climbed behind the wheel of the bus the following morning, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As the bus wound its way through the city streets, picking up passengers along the way, Harold kept stealing glances at the girl in the rearview mirror. Today she seemed even quieter than usual, her posture rigid and tense. When she finally settled into her seat, she tucked her feet underneath her, hugging her backpack tightly against her chest. The gesture struck Harold as odd, almost defensive, as though she were hiding something or protecting herself from something. The rest of the ride passed uneventfully, but Harold's mind raced with possibilities. What was she hiding, and why? Did she seem so guarded? By the time she disembarked at her usual stop, Harold felt more confused than ever. Yet beneath the confusion lay a growing sense of urgency. Whatever was troubling the girl, it clearly wasn't going away on its own. And if Harold had learned anything during his years as a bus driver, it was that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could have the biggest impact. With newfound resolve, Harold prepared himself for the days ahead. Little did he know, his decision to dig deeper would lead to a discovery that would change both their lives forever. As the days stretched into another week, Harold found himself growing increasingly preoccupied with the young girl on the bus. Her presence had become more than just a fleeting observation. It was now a constant weight in his thoughts, gnawing at him like an unanswered question. Each morning, as she boarded the bus with her tear-streaked face and slumped posture, Harold felt a pang of helplessness. He wanted to do something, but he didn't know what. How could he approach her without making her feel uncomfortable or cornered? What if his interference made things worse instead of better? Despite these doubts, Harold couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Something wasn't right. The girl, Tasha, as he'd overheard other students call her, was clearly carrying a burden far heavier than any child should have to bear. Her silence spoke volumes, louder than words ever could. It was as though she had built an invisible wall around herself, shielding her pain from the world while simultaneously isolating her from it. Harold wished he could break through that wall even just a little to let her know she wasn't alone. One particularly chilly morning, as the bus pulled away from a stop, Harold glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed something unusual. Tasha was fidgeting nervously with the strap of her backpack, tugging at it repeatedly as though trying to adjust it. But there was no need for adjustment. Her movements were jerky, almost frantic, and her eyes darted around the bus as if searching for something or someone. Harold's instincts kicked in immediately. Something about her behavior seemed off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. When they reached her usual stop, Tasha hesitated before standing up. She lingered in her seat for a moment longer than usual, clutching her bag tightly against her chest. Then, just as she moved toward the aisle, Harold saw her glance quickly under her seat. The action was so brief, so subtle, that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Harold did. His curiosity deepened. What was she looking at? Was she hiding something? Or was she afraid of something hidden beneath her seat? That evening, after finishing his shift and returning home, Harold couldn't stop thinking about Tasha's strange behavior. Margaret greeted him at the door with a warm smile, but Harold barely registered her cheerful, "How was your day?" Instead, he walked straight to the kitchen table where they usually shared their evenings together, and sat down heavily in his chair. Margaret frowned, sensing his unease. "What's wrong, Harold?" she asked, joining him at the table. "It's that girl," Harold replied, rubbing his temples. "The one I told you about, the one who cries every morning." Margaret nodded encouragingly. "Yes, go on." "She did something today," Harold continued, his voice low and uncertain. "Just before she got off the bus, She looked under. Her seat. And earlier she kept messing with her backpack like she was nervous about something. I don't know what it means, but it feels important. Margaret leaned forward, her brow furrowed in thought. Do you think she dropped something? Maybe she lost something valuable and is too scared to say anything. Harold shook his head slowly. I don't think so. It wasn't like she was looking for something she'd misplaced. It was more like she was checking to make sure something was still there. Or maybe... He paused, considering the possibility. Maybe she was making sure no one else found it. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. You think someone might be targeting her? I don't know, Harold admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. But whatever's going on, it's not good. I can feel it. Margaret reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. If you're this worried, then maybe you should take a closer look tomorrow, just to be safe. The idea lingered in Harold's mind, long after their conversation ended. Could he really bring himself to check under Tasha's seat? Wouldn't that invade her privacy? Yet the alternative, doing nothing and potentially letting her suffer in silence, felt equally unbearable. By the time Harold climbed into bed that night, he had resolved to act. If nothing else, he owed it to himself to find out whether his suspicions were justified. The next morning, Harold arrived at the depot earlier than usual. As he prepared the bus for its daily route, he rehearsed what he would say to Tasha if the situation called for it. He wanted to sound calm and kind, not accusatory or intrusive. After all, she was just a child, a frightened, vulnerable child who needed compassion, not judgment. When Tasha boarded the bus at her usual stop, Harold greeted her with a soft smile. Good morning, he said warmly, hoping to ease any tension she might feel. Tasha murmured a barely audible response before shuffling to her seat. Once again, she tucked her feet underneath her and hugged her backpack close, her body language rigid and tense. As the bus rumbled along its route, Harold kept stealing glances at her in the rearview mirror. Today, she seemed even quieter than usual, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. When they approached her stop, Harold knew it was now or never. Pretending to adjust the air vents near the back of the bus, he casually walked toward her seat and knelt down beside her. Everything okay here? He asked gently, giving her a reassuring nod. Tasha froze, her wide eyes locking onto his for just a moment before darting away. Her hands tightened around her backpack, and her breathing quickened. For a split second, Harold wondered if he'd made a mistake. But then he reminded himself why he was doing this. To help her, not to scare her. Without waiting for a response, Harold glanced under her seat and immediately felt his blood run cold. There, crumpled beneath her feet, lay several handwritten notes scribbled in angry red ink. Phrases like, "You don't belong," and "Go back where you came from" leapt off the pages, each word a dagger aimed squarely at Tasha's heart. Some of the notes were signed, others weren't. All were hateful. Harold clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. Not now. Not when Tasha needed him to be strong. Slowly, he turned, his attention back to her. "Tasha," he said softly, "can we talk?" At first, Tasha refused to meet his gaze. Her lips trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. Harold waited patiently, giving her the space she needed to process what was happening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Harold exhaled deeply. Relief, washing over him. "These notes," he began, gesturing to the crumpled papers beneath her seat. "Where did they come from?" Tasha hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. They've been showing up in my locker, and now my bag." She swallowed hard, struggling to hold back tears. "I don't know who's doing it. They won't stop." Harold's heart broke for her. He wanted to wrap her in a hug, to shield her from the cruelty of the world. But he knew that wasn't what she needed right now. What she needed was someone to listen, to believe her, and to help her fight back against the injustice she was facing. "Tasha," Harold said firmly, "you don't deserve this. No one does. Do you want me to help you figure out who's behind this?" Tasha hesitated again, her fear palpable. "What if they find out I told?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if they hurt me?" Harold shook his head emphatically. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen. You're not alone in this, okay? I'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time since Harold had met her, Tasha allowed herself to hope. Though her tears continued to fall, they carried a different weight now, not despair, but relief. Together, they agreed to report the bullying to the school administration after classes ended that day. With Harold by her side, Tasha finally felt brave enough to confront the darkness that had haunted her for so long. As the bus pulled away from her stop, Harold returned to his seat, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't rest until justice was served, for Tasha and for every child who deserved to live free from fear. After the discovery of the hateful notes under Tasha's seat, Harold felt a surge of determination. He knew he had to act quickly and carefully to ensure Tasha didn't feel abandoned or overwhelmed by what was happening, as much as he wanted to confront the bullies directly. Harold understood that his role wasn't to take matters into his own hands, but to guide Tasha toward people who could help her properly, people like school counselors, teachers, and administrators. Still, he couldn't shake the image of those cruel words scrawled in red ink. They weren't just pieces of paper. They were weapons designed to hurt, to isolate, to destroy. And Harold refused to let them win. The rest of the bus ride passed, quietly, though Harold kept glancing at Tasha through the rearview mirror. She sat stiffly in her seat, staring out the window with tears streaming silently down her face. Her small frame seemed even smaller now, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. Harold wanted nothing more than to pull over, kneel beside her and tell her everything would be okay. But he knew empty promises wouldn't help her. Instead, he focused on reassuring her with subtle gestures, a warm smile when she glanced up, a gentle nod to show he was still there for her. When Tasha finally stepped off the bus at her stop, Harold called out softly, "See you tomorrow, Tasha." His voice carried a mix of kindness and resolve, letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. She turned back briefly, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment before she hurried away. It was enough for Harold to see a flicker of trust in her expression, a tiny spark of hope that hadn't been there before. That evening, Harold couldn't stop thinking about Tasha. He replayed their conversation in his mind, trying to piece together how best to support her moving forward. Margaret noticed his distracted demeanor during dinner and asked what was troubling him. When Harold explained the situation, including the hateful notes he'd found, Margaret listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "This is serious," she said after a pause. "You need to make sure someone at the school knows about this. This isn't something Tasha should have to deal with alone." Harold nodded. "I agree. We're going to talk to the principal tomorrow after school. I promised her I'd go with her so she doesn't feel scared." Margaret smiled approvingly. "Good. She needs someone like you, a steady presence, someone who cares. Just remember to let her lead the way. She has to feel like she's in control of this, even if she's afraid." Her advice stuck with Harold as he prepared for the next day. He rehearsed what he would say to the principal, imagining different scenarios and responses. At the same time, he reminded himself to stay flexible, to listen to Tasha and adapt based on her comfort level. This wasn't about him. It was about giving her the tools and support she needed to stand up against the bullying. The following morning, Tasha boarded the bus looking even more anxious than usual. Her hands trembled as she clutched her backpack, and her eyes darted around nervously, as if expecting trouble at any moment. Harold greeted her warmly, keeping his tone light and friendly. "Morning, Tasha," he said with a reassuring smile. "Ready for today?" Tasha hesitated before nodding faintly. "I guess," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You're stronger than you think," Harold told her gently. "And you're not alone." Remember that." Tasha didn't respond, but Harold saw the faintest trace of gratitude in her eyes. For the rest of the ride, she stared out the window, lost in thought. Harold left her be, knowing she needed time to process everything that was happening. After school, Harold parked the bus near the entrance and waited for Tasha outside the building. When she emerged, her steps were hesitant, almost reluctant. Harold waved to catch her attention and she walked over slowly, clutching her backpack like a shield. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Hey," Harold said softly. "You ready?" Tasha swallowed hard and nodded. Together they made their way to the school office where Harold requested a meeting with the principal. While they waited, Harold tried to keep the mood light, asking Tasha about her classes and hobbies. Though her answers were brief, Harold could tell she appreciated the effort. Small talk might not solve her problems, but it helped ease some of the tension coiled tightly inside her. When the principal, a tall, stern-looking woman named Mrs. Thompson, finally invited them into her office, Harold gave Tasha an encouraging pat on the shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "We've got this." Inside the office, Mrs. Thompson greeted them with polite curiosity. "What can I do for you two?" she asked, her tone brisk but not unkind. Harold gestured for Tasha to speak first, wanting her to take ownership of the conversation. After a long pause, Tasha took a deep breath and began haltingly. I've been getting these notes," she said, pulling the crumpled papers from her bag and placing them on the desk. "They're mean, really mean, and I don't know who's doing it." Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted instantly, her professional demeanor softening into genuine concern. She picked up the notes one by one, reading each message silently. As she flipped through the pages, her jaw tightened and her lips pressed into a thin line. "These are unacceptable," she said firmly, setting the notes aside. "Absolutely unacceptable. Have you shown these to anyone else, Tasha? Your parents? A teacher?" Tasha shook her head. "No, I didn't want to bother anyone, and I thought maybe they'd stop." Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, her gaze steady and compassionate. "Tasha, you did the right thing by coming here. No one deserves to be treated this way, especially not a student in our school. We're going to figure out who's responsible for this and we're going to put a stop to it. Do you understand?" Tasha nodded hesitantly, tears welling up in her eyes again. Harold placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "She's got my support too," he added. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." Mrs. Thompson nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Mr." She trailed off, realizing she didn't know Harold's name. "Harold," he supplied with a small smile. "I'm her bus driver." "Well, thank you, Harold," Mrs. Thompson said sincerely. "Your involvement means a lot, not just to Tasha, but to all of us. Bullying is a serious issue, and it takes everyone working together to address it effectively." Over. The next hour, the three of them discussed possible steps to identify and address the source of the bullying. Mrs. Thompson assured Tasha that the school would launch an immediate investigation, starting with reviewing security footage from hallways and classrooms. She also promised to increase supervision in areas where bullying often occurred, such as locker bays and cafeterias. Most importantly, she emphasized that Tasha's safety was their top priority. As they left the office, Harold noticed a slight change in Tasha's demeanor. She still looked wary, but there was a newfound sense of determination in her posture. For the first time in weeks, she held her head a little higher, her steps a bit steadier. On the bus ride home, Harold kept the atmosphere light, chatting about random topics to distract Tasha from the stress of the day. By the time they reached her stop, she managed a small, tentative smile, a sign, however faint, that she was beginning to believe things might get better. That night, as Harold reflected on the day's events, he felt a mixture of relief and resolve. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, for Tasha or for anyone involved, but progress had been made. More importantly, Tasha now knew she wasn't fighting this battle alone, and as long as Harold had anything to say about it, she never would be. The days following the meeting with Mrs. Thompson brought a mix of emotions for Tasha and Harold. For Tasha, it was a strange blend of relief and lingering fear. On one hand, she felt a weight lifted, knowing that someone finally believed her and was taking action to help. On the other hand, the thought of facing her bullies or worse, retaliation, kept her on edge. Every time she walked down the hallway at school, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching her, judging her, waiting for their next chance to strike. Harold, too, was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. He felt proud of himself for stepping up and supporting Tasha, but he also worried about whether the school's efforts would truly make a difference. Would they find the culprits? Would the bullying stop entirely? Or would it simply go underground? These questions gnawed at him, especially during his long hours behind the wheel of the bus. Still, he reminded himself that progress often took time, and every step forward mattered, even if it didn't feel like enough. A shift in atmosphere. Over the next week, subtle changes began to ripple through the school. Mrs. Thompson wasted no time implementing new measures to address the bullying epidemic. Security cameras were reviewed meticulously, and additional staff members were stationed in areas where incidents were most likely to occur. Teachers held classroom discussions about kindness, respect, and standing up for others. Posters with anti-bullying slogans appeared on walls throughout the building, serving as constant reminders of the importance of treating everyone fairly. For Tasha, these changes provided a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. While she still carried her backpack protectively and avoided making eye contact with certain students, she noticed fewer hostile glares and whispered comments. Some kids even smiled at her in passing, a small gesture, but one that made her heart lift ever so slightly. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Harold observed these shifts from his vantage point on the bus. Each morning, Tasha seemed a little less tense, a little more willing to engage with the world around her. One day, she actually greeted him with a quiet, "Good morning," before settling into her seat. It was the first time she'd initiated conversation, and Harold beamed with pride. "How's everything going?" he asked gently, glancing back at her in the mirror. Tasha hesitated before answering. "It's better," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "People aren't saying mean things to me anymore, and some of them have been nice." "That's wonderful news," Harold replied warmly. "You deserve kindness, Tasha. Don't forget that." Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, and for a moment Harold dared to hope that the worst was behind them. The investigation unfolds. Meanwhile, the school's investigation continued. After reviewing security footage, administrators identified several students who had been lingering suspiciously near Tasha's locker around the times the notes were left. When confronted, 2 of the students confessed to writing the messages, claiming they had only done it as a joke. Their parents were called in, and disciplinary actions were taken, including suspensions and mandatory counseling sessions. But the revelations didn't end there. As the school dug deeper, they discovered that Tasha wasn't the only victim. Other students came forward, admitting they had also received hateful notes or endured verbal harassment. What started as an isolated case quickly unraveled into a broader issue of systemic bullying within the school community. The administration vowed to tackle the problem head-on, launching workshops and peer mentorship programs aimed at fostering empathy and understanding among students. When Tasha learned about the extent of the bullying, she felt a mixture of anger and sadness. How could so many people suffer in silence without anyone noticing? At the same time, she found solace in knowing she wasn't alone. She began attending the peer mentorship meetings, where students shared their experiences and brainstormed ways to support one another. Slowly, she started to rebuild her confidence, finding strength in solidarity. Facing the bullies, one particularly challenging moment came when Tasha crossed paths with one of her former tormentors in the cafeteria. The girl, a tall, lanky 8th grader, named Rachel, approached her table awkwardly, twisting her hands nervously. "Hey, can I sit here?" Rachel asked hesitantly. Tasha stiffened, her fork hovering mid-air. Memories of Rachel's cruel laughter flooded back. and for a moment she considered refusing. But then she remembered something Harold had said. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about moving forward. Taking a deep breath, Tasha nodded slowly. Rachel slid into the seat across from her, looking visibly uncomfortable. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she mumbled, avoiding Tasha's gaze. What I did was wrong. I shouldn't have written those notes. I was stupid, and I didn't think about how it would make you feel. Tasha studied Rachel carefully, searching for sincerity in her expression. After a long pause, she spoke. Do you really mean that? Rachel nodded earnestly. Yeah, I do. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I don't want to be that person anymore. Can we start over? Tasha hesitated, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to hold on to her anger, to punish Rachel for the pain she'd caused. But another part of her recognized that forgiveness could be freeing, for both of them. Finally, she extended her hand across the table. Okay, she said softly. Let's start over. Rachel's face lit up with relief, and the two girls spent the rest of lunch talking cautiously, testing the waters of their newfound truce. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. A ripple effect as word spread about Tasha's courage in speaking out, and her willingness to forgive. The impact rippled through the school. Other victims of bullying found the strength to come forward, emboldened by her example. Even students who hadn't experienced bullying themselves began advocating for change, organizing campaigns to promote inclusivity and acceptance. Harold watched all of this unfold with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Though he hadn't anticipated becoming involved in such a significant way, he realized that his decision to check under Tasha's seat had sparked a chain reaction. By choosing to care, he had opened the door for countless others to do the same. One morning, as Tasha boarded the bus, she surprised Harold with a wide, genuine smile. Thank you, she said, her voice clear and confident. For everything. Harold grinned back, his heart swelling with pride. You're welcome, Tasha, but remember, it's your bravery that's making the real difference. And it was true. Tasha's story had become a catalyst for change, not just in her own life, but in the lives of everyone around her. While the scars of bullying wouldn't disappear overnight, the healing process had begun. And for Harold, that was more than enough to keep him inspired for the journeys ahead. As weeks turned into months, the transformation in Tasha became impossible to ignore. The once quiet, tearful girl who had boarded Harold's bus every morning was now a different person entirely. Or perhaps, more accurately, she was finally allowing her true self to shine through. Her posture straightened, her eyes sparkled with renewed confidence, and her smile, once rare and fleeting, had become a regular feature of her daily routine. Even her interactions with others grew warmer and more open. She greeted classmates by name, joined group projects enthusiastically, and participated actively in class discussions. Harold noticed these changes immediately. Each morning, as Tasha climbed aboard the bus, she carried herself with a quiet strength that inspired admiration. Sometimes she'd even strike up conversations with other students seated nearby, laughing softly at their jokes or sharing stories about her weekend. It was a far cry from the isolation she had endured for so long, and Harold couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride, knowing he had played a small part in helping her reclaim her voice. A ripple effect, beyond expectations. What amazed Harold most, however, was how Tasha's courage had sparked a ripple effect throughout the school community. The anti-bullying initiatives launched after her initial report gained momentum, transforming the atmosphere in ways no one could have predicted. Peer mentorship programs flourished, with older students volunteering to guide younger ones through challenges both academic and personal. Workshops on empathy and inclusion became standing traditions, drawing praise from parents and teachers alike. Even the students who weren't directly involved in mentoring or organizing events seemed to carry themselves differently. Conversations in hallways shifted from gossip and negativity to encouragement and support. Acts of kindness, big and small, became commonplace. Students held doors open for one another, offered words of affirmation during stressful exam periods, and stood up when they witnessed unkind behavior. It was as though Tasha's bravery had awakened something dormant within everyone, a collective desire to create a better, kinder environment. One day, while driving his usual route, Harold overheard two teenagers discussing an upcoming charity drive organized by the student council. "It's cool how everyone's pitching in," one boy said. "Makes you realize how much we can do when we work together." The other nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, it's like we're not just kids anymore. We actually have power to change stuff." Harold smiled to himself, marveling at how profoundly Tasha's actions had reshaped perspectives, not just among adults but among her peers as well. Change wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it happened quietly, one act of courage at a time. Healing through forgiveness. For Tasha, forgiveness remained a cornerstone of her journey toward healing. While some of her former tormentors apologized sincerely, others never acknowledged their wrongdoing. Yet Tasha chose not to dwell on bitterness or resentment. Instead, she focused on moving forward, channeling her energy into building friendships and pursuing her passions. She joined the art club, discovering a love for painting landscapes that reminded her of happier times. She also became a peer, mentor herself, offering guidance and encouragement to younger students struggling with similar issues. One afternoon, as Harold waited outside the school to pick up passengers, he spotted Tasha sitting on a bench with a group of friends. They were laughing and chatting animatedly, sketchbooks spread across their laps. When Tasha looked up and saw him, she waved excitedly and jogged over to the bus. "Guess what?" she said breathlessly, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "I got invited to show my paintings at the school art fair next month." "That's incredible," Harold exclaimed, genuinely thrilled. "You must be so proud." "I am," Tasha replied, grinning from ear to ear. "And I owe a lot of it to you, Harold. If you hadn't helped me back then, I don't think I'd have found the courage to try new things." Harold shook his head modestly. "Nonsense, Tasha. You did all the hard work. I just gave you a little push." But Tasha wasn't having it. "No," she insisted firmly. "You gave me hope when I didn't have any. That's worth more than anything." Her words struck a chord deep within Harold. For years, he had viewed his role as a bus driver as nothing more than a job, a way to earn a living while connecting with people along the way. But Tasha's gratitude made him realize that his position allowed him to make a difference in ways he hadn't fully appreciated before. Every passenger stepping onto his bus brought their own story, their own struggles, and their own hopes. And Harold now understood that even the smallest gesture of kindness, from a warm greeting to a listening ear, could leave an indelible mark. A new chapter. As the school year drew to a close, Harold reflected on how much had changed since that fateful morning when he first noticed Tasha crying on the bus. What began as a simple act of curiosity, checking under her seat, had grown into something far greater, a movement toward compassion and understanding. The lessons learned from Tasha's experience extended beyond the walls of the school, reaching into homes and communities. Parents praised the administration for addressing bullying head-on, while local news outlets highlighted the success of the school's anti-bullying campaigns. Tasha herself became a symbol of resilience and hope. During the end-of-year assembly, she delivered a speech that left the entire auditorium in awe. Standing confidently at the podium, she recounted her journey, from the days of hiding under her seat to finding her voice and advocating for change. Her message was simple yet powerful. We all have the power to choose kindness. Even when it feels scary, even when it seems impossible, choosing kindness makes the world a better place, for ourselves and for others. When she finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Harold sat near the back of the room, his chest swelling with emotion. He had seen Tasha at her lowest point, and now here she was, standing tall and inspiring, hundreds of people with her story. It was a testament to her strength, and to the impact of believing in someone when they needed it most. Carrying the lesson forward. That summer, Harold decided to take his newfound perspective even further. Inspired by Tasha's journey, he began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring children who faced challenges similar to hers. Whether it was helping them navigate conflicts with peers or simply lending an ear when they needed to talk, Harold poured his heart into making a difference. Margaret often teased him about his sudden enthusiasm, but deep down, she was proud of the man he had become. Meanwhile, Tasha stayed in touch, occasionally sending Harold updates about her life. She wrote letters describing her adventures at summer camp, where she taught younger kids how to paint. In one letter, she enclosed a small watercolor painting of a sunrise over rolling hills, inscribed with the words, "Thank you for being my light when everything felt dark." Harold framed the painting and hung it above his desk at home, letting it serve as a reminder of why he did what he did. Life wasn't always easy, and neither was helping others. But moments like this, the smiles, the gratitude, the transformations, made every challenge worthwhile. An enduring legacy years later, when Tasha graduated high school as valedictorian, Harold attended the ceremony, clapping louder than anyone else when she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. As she spotted him in the crowd, she mouthed a silent, "Thank you," her eyes shining with unshed tears. Later, during the reception, she hugged him tightly, whispering, "You'll always be my hero, Harold." Harold chuckled softly, patting her back. "And you'll always be mine, Tasha." Their bond, forged in the crucible of struggle and triumph, remained unbreakable, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and connection. Though their paths would inevitably diverge as Tasha pursued her dreams, the lessons they had shared would stay with them forever. For Harold, the bus route continued as it always had, winding through familiar streets and picking up passengers, whose stories he might never fully know. But each face that stepped onto his bus carried the potential for change, for growth, for healing, for hope. And Harold knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he would always be ready to meet them halfway.